In our lives there's a time a-coming when all the world seems lost and torn. In our lives there's a time...
Very warm welcome to all of you. We are very pleased to have today Gary Reusche. Gary will be sharing his insights on this topic, this very timely topic. And there's some beautiful music that inspires us and gets into the... I think somebody has to mute. So climate change and materialism, challenges for an ever-advancing civilization. Now, it's an ideal person to talk about this because Gary has had many years of experience in the World Bank, studying exactly these kind of elements. How can the world come back to it? Traveled around the world and worked in different parts from Asia to Central Africa, Russia, is now living in Ukraine. And he's also part of this spirit that does not stick with what is right, what is wrong rather, but really does not accept it. Since he was a youth, I think at the last presentation I mentioned, I think he took part in every possible demonstration against anything that was unjust. So he starts from a position where he's challenging the things that are not right. He had time to think about how to make it right at the World Bank. And now he's actually, thankfully, able to actually do it, which is great. And his so-called retirement is going to share with us this very timely topic. So thank you very much, Gary. We look forward to your session. And after Gary's introduction, we welcome a nice question and answers session. So please do post your questions in the Q&A that you find at the bottom so we can have an interactive session. Gary, thank you.
Yeah, I think, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to be with all the people who have joined in for today. I hope I'm going to be talking about something that's close to the heart of many people, because it's certainly very close to my heart and has been for most of my life. And indeed, I have traveled around the world and worked in, I would say, social economic development, which deals with a lot of different issues. So it is something that I've always dealt with in my life and dealing with it today. I would like to start off with about a 6-minute little video that I produced just to make it, a little bit more exciting than just me talking, and to kind of set the theme for discussions that will follow after that. And so if everything goes right, then we're going to start that video right now. Our contemporary world has been built upon the belief that economic growth is positive. Worldwide politicians talk about how fast the economy is growing, as if this is so wonderful. Yet, if we study the reality of today's world, economic growth is now destroying the Earth's living systems. This threat to our contemporary life should fill the headlines of today's news. It should be discussed, I think, in every family, in every neighborhood. It is really that important. Bahá'u'lláh, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, warned us in the middle of the 19th century not to overleap the bounds of moderation. If we overleap moderation, he said, it can bring great evil upon men. If the world has not overleaped the bounds of moderation, then I really don't understand the meaning of this warning by Bahá'u'lláh. In the United States, we see discussions almost every day about racial inequality. For so many years, these issues were not properly addressed. So I think there's so many issues today. Well, discourse is needed. When we have discourses about many issues, we're going to see that a global civilization is a very large element of the solution to these problems. Let's look at some examples. The facts indicate that today we are overshooting the biocapacity of the planet by 60% or more. And every day we consume even more, and every day it gets even worse. If we want to talk about water or land or soil or fossil fuels or the growth in world production, all of these things and even more are resulting in the overuse of the Earth's resources and is leading us towards an eventual catastrophe. What can we do to conserve the resources of the planet? Individually, probably not very much. We can do something, of course, but in order to work on these issues, and I think all of us must work on these issues, then local communities also need to be fully engaged. Discourses, discussions about integration and disintegration need to take place on every level, starting with families and neighborhoods. Social discourse is a major activity of Baha'i communities. The serious issues for community discourse are really numerous. Discourse, I think, includes reading the current reality, learning more about the issues. We need to talk together about the issues and to think about the positive actions that can be taken in the nearest possible future, because time really is of the essence. Today we have the pandemic of the coronavirus. Every day I'm sure all of us follow the news of this pandemic. So what needs to be done? What can we do? What seems obvious is that a transformative change is required, which really relies, I think, on the stirrings of the grassroots. For example, I think our healthcare system must be improved, made available and affordable for all people, rich, poor, black, white, brown, red, working together at local, regional, national, and also international levels. Then there's climate change, which can lead to much worse than the coronavirus pandemic. Issues related to fossil fuels, mega industries spewing carbon dioxide, chasing profits in the next quarter, mega agricultural producers, more and more cars, and so much more is contributing to climate change. We need to learn all the facts about climate change and then talk about it. Climate change is really an urgent subject of discourse that needs to start with families even, then communities, then regions, then nations. This is an issue that really we're not addressing significantly as the climate protesters, the young people of today, are talking about almost every Friday. Perhaps an integrative idea would be to find some way to support the youth that are protesting against climate change. We live on one planet. We are one people. And there has to be a worldwide collaboration and working together in order to be able to solve the climate crisis. Well, thank God for young people. They are learning about climate risk and they want to see mitigation. In my opinion and the opinion of many, climate change is not sufficiently addressed from the top. The Baha'i community places great emphasis on children and youth. Historically, youth movements often catalyze change. It may be that the future of our world is in the hands of the youth and not our political leaders. Who knows? We need to support these movements. The Guardian wrote that he could not see how Baha'is could remain indifferent to vital issues of the day. I'm sure that nobody is indifferent, but without social action, it sometimes looks like indifference, particularly to those outside of the Baha'i community. Coronavirus, climate change, economic growth, all interact on the local, national, and international levels. In the Rizwan letter of the Universal House of Justice, the Baha'i community's response to the pandemic has been called outstanding, making reference to the resilience and undiminished vitality of the Baha'i world in the face of a challenge which has no likeness in living memory. There is much capacity for discourse and social action, and much needs to be done. Looking at the news during the last couple of weeks, we see much agreement about the issue of racial prejudice in the United States and the readiness of many to arise and to work for transformative change. In addition to the Baha'i community, there are other groups that are working for many of the same ideals of the Baha'i faith. I think that in addition to Baha'i discourse and social action, partnership with other groups, particularly youth groups, will help raise these subjects to a level where societies around the world, God willing, will stand up, find agreement, and take action together. So, I really wanted to talk about issues that I think need to be talked about. Discourse is the word that we often use as something that's important, and discourse sometimes is thought about at a very high level, like at an academic level. But I think when we talk about discourse, the meaning is that the discourse can happen in a family, in a neighborhood, in a group, and at your workplace and other places. And really, what I really identified, really, if you look around at the news and the things that are going on, that we spend so much time in the news talking about things that really don't seem to matter all that much. And the things that matter most are the things we're talking about the least. It often looks that way. And so, when I'm thinking about these issues, whether we're talking about the coronavirus or climate change, like I showed this one picture of the coronavirus kind of floating from one part of the world to the other part of the world. The idea was to say, okay, there's no borders for the coronavirus. Well, there's also no borders for climate change. There's no border for the globalized kind of economy that we live in. There's even no borders for the international banking system. I mean, all the borders between these things seem to be disappearing, which means that before we're going to be able to solve these things, we're going to have to take them to a global level. But that's really a subject for another talk. And some other Baha'is that we know of, for example, there's 3 Baha'is of the EBBF who've written a book called Global Governance and the Emergence of Global Institutions, which talks about how we can try to develop a system of global governance that will be able to work with these issues that are just seems to be accumulating around us day by day, that we really can't afford to not pay attention to. So the other thing I just wanted to say that, and this is something that I often think about, and some people tell me, they say, when you talk about these things, sometimes it depresses people. And I say, well, yeah, I mean, it's not very nice, but it doesn't depress me because I believe I have the confidence that the world has all of the capabilities. Even when we look at the Black Lives Matters today, some of the things that are happening are really quite unexpected, but quite honestly, it doesn't surprise me. And it looks like something that's happening that should be happening. So I think the fact that we talk about things that are maybe not very pleasant, which is during discourses with our family or with our friends or at the work or wherever it may be, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're leading ourselves into a depression and nothing's going to happen. I think quite on the contrary, that when we understand these things and where they're coming from, then to start talking about how we're going to solve them at a local level, then I think we're getting somewhere. Because I don't know, maybe it's me, maybe other people feel the same, but personally, I see and agree with the young youth that are involved in the climate protests, who are saying that the politicians are not listening to them, are not listening to the world, are destroying their future. I have to say I agreed with them 100%. And I think most of the scientists around the world agree with them 100%. So yeah, okay, it's not just youth, but these youth seem to be galvanizing people. And I really think that getting behind them is great. Okay, there's a lot of other things that we can talk about, and a lot of other questions that even I have, and I'm sure that you have. But I think the main issue in this webinar is that we have a discussion. And so I'd like to hear what you think. I'd like to hear what problems you think need to be dealt with. Maybe you have some ideas that you can share with us. And I think that would be wonderful for everybody. So I'll turn it over now to just kind of more of a questions that are coming through, and being able to discuss these questions, with you.
That's a great introduction. Already a few questions have popped in. Before we go into that, you talked about movements that are happening and how we should be joining movements and be part of movements, obviously for good. Now, my question is, how do we choose the movements? Which movements would you suggest because there's a lot of movements going in different directions. Which are the ones do you think are worth joining? How do we make the decision of the right ones?
Okay, well, thank you very much. And actually, I anticipated this question, and I might have even anticipated that it would come from you. But basically, the Baha'i Faith has answers to most of these questions, the Universal House of Justice. For example, to Baha'is, we must guard against, in the words of the House of Justice, any way of ever seeming to identify ourselves or the cause, the Baha'i Faith that is, with any political party. So that's kind of excluded. And there's a lot of reasons for that we can talk about, but that's kind of excluded. But then the Universal House of Justice goes on to the other and talk about it from a different perspective. They meaning the Baha'is and others, working with the Baha'is, must also guard against the other extreme of never taking part in these issues with other progressive groups, never taking, we must guard against not doing that, right? In conferences or committees designed to promote some activity in accord with our own teaching. So when we talk about climate change, when we talk about social equity and other issues, these are common and very important themes that we've been talking about in the faith for over 100 years. And so I think that's what identifies where we should be going on any kind of social activism. What are those things that are harmonious with the same things that we feel are important in this age?
Beautiful. And we have Sheila. Sheila Goodman actually answered your call for connection with youth. And she has a very direct question. How do we get involved with youth groups? If they are the source, if that's where the energy is, if that's where the interest should be. So what is the best approach?
Okay, I'll just go back to because I'm older. When I was a young Baha'i, a youth, running around the world, getting involved in social action like women's rights and things like that, there was a pamphlet written by Rahia Khanum, I think it was in the 50s, and where she talks about, teaching the faith. And one way she says that we really need to reach out to other people is to go join them as, and see what they're up to, be inside of these groups, work with them, work hand in hand with them, collaborate with them. So I think this is really, we identify these youth groups and we join them. And of course, if they're going in ways in which we cannot support, then I don't think that would be a good tactic. For example, I run a small social service product here for youth groups, and the people are invited here, and we expect a certain standard of living. We're not going to drink alcohol. We're going to be working on, the various things that are important to us as families and as individuals. And if somebody comes in and tries to disrupt us in any way with a different orientation, let's go have fun and do some drugs or whatever, we're going to exclude them. We don't want to be in that group. And so I think, you find the groups that have similar feelings and beliefs and join with them, because again, I'm absolutely convinced that nobody can do it alone. Not any of these groups, not the Baha'i community. We really, and not even one country, I think. We even need to think about, like the youth protesters. It's not just one country. It's not just Sweden anymore. It's like all of the Europe, and then it's moved to the United States, and then it moves to Japan, and then it moves to Africa. It's moved all around the world. And this, I think, ultimately is the way we have to make things. If we're ever going to make any progress on these issues, I think this is the way we're going to have to go.
Yeah, there's a stark speed at which things are warp speed that things are happening right now, and how they're just spreading so quickly across the globe. Still, the youth concept has really caught the attention of a lot of people. So Kimberly she likes the idea of having youth leading the climate change efforts, Greta Thunberg and so forth. And as old people, or she's speaking for herself, old people can support them. So there's one thing there. And then Sheila Goodman also says, senior, I don't know if I would be accepted into a youth organization. So you have specific experiences, Gary, in this. So is it so difficult to be accepted? How do you be accepted? This acceptance, I think, is important, because if you want to have a dialogue with other individuals, there has to be acceptance. Otherwise, you're not speaking to each other, you're just seeing each other without anything else. So that's a very good question. How do you get accepted into a youth situation?
It is a big issue. There are youth groups that, okay, you're an old guy, get away from me. That's absolutely true. We heard a youth in a webinar a couple of weeks ago from Canada, Ala. She, basically she talked about that. My personal opinion is that, yes, youth don't like us getting in their face. They don't like us, trying to tell them what to do. Of course, any youth, whether it's my children or others. But I work with youth here, ages from about, let's say, 9, 10, up to about 17, 18, and they love it here. And we give them the opportunity to express themselves, to be able to go forward. And really, more than anything else, I'm helping to provide the environment in which they can move ahead. And so that is the way that I think. Yes, I don't think we want to move in and try to take control. That would have not worked, I don't think, anywhere in the world. But at the same time, I think, for example, Al Gore has this group I don't remember exactly what they're called. I was supposed to go to Al Gore training a couple of weeks ago, but they canceled it because of the coronavirus. And in this training, of course, it's just a bunch of young people that are going and listening to Al Gore and other experts and learning all the science and all the reasons and all the arguments about climate change, and what are the possibilities for us to make progress in mitigating the circumstances that we fully expect to take place if things keep going at the current rate in the direction in which they're currently going in the next 10 to 20 to 30 years. So that's the best answer that I can, is try to give them the opportunity and support them. When they see that you're not trying to take over, then we don't have a problem with working with children here, but they all are very strong-willed, and that's what we actually like them to be strong-willed, to be honest.
And it's interesting to see that a lot of them actually, what I noticed, that they want to be heard. So they feel as if they're talking into a void, and we're not really, we say go off and solve the issues, but we're not really listening to what they're saying, to what they're expressing. So that may also be a good way to start the trust.
We, of course, are working here mostly on developing virtues in the children here. Of course, there's a lot of sports and everything else going on, but I always give a talk to the group when they're here, and I say, listen, you guys are great. This is really going well. Thank you very much. Okay, but I really want to ask you to do one thing. I want you to go back and talk to your friends about these things, because really, when we talk about the future, it's your future. You need to be able to understand that you need to work with it and bring your friends into this and collaborate with them if we're really going to make an effort. So I encourage them, and I give them opportunities, and I think give them ways, maybe something financial, maybe some kind of support that allows them to go in a direction that they want to go in. That's obviously something that I'm also very much concerned about as an adult. And if you do it like that, they'll talk to you and they'll include you and they'll allow you to provide some help to them. Again, as long as you don't push them too much, I think.
And we have, I promise, it's the last question that I see on youth, and then we pass. There's a number of other questions, other topics. Arthur Dahl asks, what he suggests is a very good suggestion about the free exchange, about the learning from each other, which is very important. I think at the BBF, we stress a lot the accompaniment concept, where there's no mentors, there's no coaches that tell other people what they should do or invite them for a direction, but there's really an exchange, a reciprocity, which I think is good. And specifically, Arthur asks, what media are best to be used in discourse with young people?
Well, I'm not a big fan of social media, although I use it a lot. I'm in Facebook and YouTube, and I create videos like the one I showed a little bit earlier today. But I think the real thing, the media that works well for us here, is invite them to a location like we have here, a group of them, 30 or 40, and give them the opportunity to work together and live together, even to find ways to think about what sorts of things need to be done. In other words, face-to-face type activities. But that can be difficult. I mean, to find opportunities, because so many youth are occupied with too many things that keep them out of the possibility of joining in group activities. But I do think we need to look for ways in order to have face-to-face meetings. After that, I do use social media. I try to reach out to youth with social media, and there is some advantage to that. But I really think the thing that works best, at least when I'm working with youth, is youth working with youth and encouraging those youth to work with other youth. In other words, it doesn't start. I don't need to take the lead in making the youth movement grow. For example, the youth themselves take the lead to make the youth movement grow, and my role is just to empower them and to provide them. I mean, I don't think many of the youth that I know that they're absolutely don't mind me. I mean, I'm a professor, and I've taught in universities and other places, but basically they don't mind if I go up and talk to them about things. that they need to understand. They like that, as long as I think it's within moderation.
And I thought you were going to enter in a TikTok or Insta story or anything like that. But actually, I kind of like your approach, because I feel that that's the instinctive reply. No, let's use the latest social media and so forth. But to really make things happen, you need to have the physicality of actually being together. So whilst it's much more complicated, I think exactly as you say, when youth comes together with other youth and they just together with others are a company, I think that's really the most difficult, but also the best way forward. Sorry.
You have children the same age as one of my children, and I can tell you that it's like she's 17. I mean, friends and being with people is so important to her. You know, it's so important to her. And so, you know, that's why I think the face-to-face is really quite strong at that age particularly. And that's how it was with me. I mean, yeah, we can sit behind a computer and do things, but it's not the same for young people. At least I don't think it is.
Gary, I've got good news. The easy bit is done. Now the difficult one, not the easy bit, which is totally different topic. And this is Sheila Goodman talking or asking, now, how can you make our legislators do what's right? This is the easy one. How can we change the laws? Should we change the laws? Should we push them? What should happen there?
Okay, we've talked about, yes. I mean, okay, first of all, yes. Okay, let's take something straight out of yesterday. Black Lives Matter. What's happening? Do these legislators, did they jump up and say, okay, we're going to make all these changes? Forget about it. They didn't do it. They did it because they were under social pressure, nonviolent social pressure for good reasons. And they were forced to say, well, you guys are right. Okay, I'm going to do something. Oh my God. But if they had not been out, doing the Black Lives Matter sort of thing, I don't think many of those things, it would have been the same old. Somebody gets killed, he's killed in front of the whole country. And, we talk about it for 1 week and then we move to the next subject matter. No, I don't think that's going to work. I don't think that's going to work anywhere. For climate change, for Black Lives Matters, or any other thing, that we're talking about, including globalization, the ecology issues and that sort of things. I do think we're going to require social action, serious social action, and serious discussions on these issues, or we're just not going to get to, or the legislators are not going to get to it. I can give examples from Ukraine, but it's just, it was the young people that really put the pressure, nonviolent pressure, discussing, we want to change the laws from the old Soviet system. We want to be more European. And they actually ended up having a revolution, quote unquote, and huge changes have taken place in the last 5 years because of that. But it was the youth who did it. And if they had stayed at home, it would not have happened. And I tell them this frequently: you're not Russian today because you went out on the streets 5 years ago and said this is not right. And by the way, you took your parents with you.
Now, I love that you keep saying that youth should, but you guys, have you listened to Gary just now? So to me, this young guy of X amount of years, that to me is the youthful spirit that's in all of us. So whilst I do enjoy youth, but I do like this attitude. And I'm not sure if you want to, Jim Parker, on the same area of laws. And I'm not sure if you want to add something. She asked, how do you address the reality of obstructive elected officials? I think what you said kind of covers it. Do you want to add something to that?
Well, first of all, education. So many of the things. I mean, again, I have a perspective. I'm by birth American, but I haven't lived in the United States since I was basically a Baha'i youth. And but I follow the United States. And the laws in the United States changed in the time I've been away, 40 years, in big ways, And so when I came to the Ukraine, which is very well known for its corruption, I used to tell people we're here to work on the development of Ukraine, and because it has corruption and everything else, there's a lot of oligarchs here. And these oligarchs make laws that are beneficial to oligarchs. And then I said, you see, we're here and we're helping Ukraine. And then all of a sudden I see the same thing happening in the United States, that the legal structures in the United States are being written by people for their own benefits by companies, by agricultural firms, and others. And so, and of course, a lot of money is going into the politicians. And so somehow along the way, we have to let people understand that, we need to be able to understand why things happen the way they do. And so sometimes when I have discussions with friends in the United States, I say, why are you talking about that way? Why do you think this happened? Why do you think that the United States went that way in the last 40 years? Maybe it's because you let it happen. Maybe you were doing something else and you should have been looking at the circumstances around you, reading the reality, and doing the right thing and making things go in the right direction. But instead, okay, it's not instead. I mean, a lot of people did good things, but not enough was done to keep it from going off in that direction. And you can hear people saying that on the news today, actually. Generals were saying it, academics are saying, very smart people, journalists are saying it on the news to say, they're all saying basically that we let these things happen. And this is not the United States that they know of and they want anymore. Generals are saying that, a whole group of them, about 10 of them in the last week, said, this is not the country that we want anymore. So that's the discourse that we need to have in order for the politicians to wake up and say, okay, we got it. We're not going in the right direction, and then you go in the right direction.
So, Gary, we're on a roll. Youth has been engaged. We've addressed all the laws and the reluctant lawyers. Now another area. Vahid asks, does a materialist mindset necessarily push people to think only about the short term? No, because I think this is really the dilemma. One of the key fundamental issues that we're addressing is even on COVID. It's happening now. People are dying now. We're reacting. If it will happen in 10 years, it's not so easy. Do you think that it's a materialist mindset is what pushes to this short term? What's your reaction there?
Okay, I'm involved with a course with a couple other faculty members called 11. And in this course, we describe how materialism came to be so dominant in our cultures today. It didn't happen by accident. You can study it, you can study it. And so this material happened. And again, we talk about EBBF, we're a business community, but let's talk a little bit about what faults business have in this materialism, the mindset. When we look at the way business is being developed today, you remember that we've done some stuff in EBBF about, what are companies doing? Are companies producing things that we really need? Are they mostly interested in trying to make a profit in the next quarter and to increase this in growing materialism? Or I can use another example from the Soviet Union. When I arrived in Moscow in 1991, the city of Moscow was basically unchanged from the Soviet era. It was a very dismal, gray facility, and since then, it's turned into what I call an American mall. It has gone from totally black, non-materialistic to totally materialistic, and people are really focused on getting these material things. Materialism is, in any study you can look at, again, we need to study these things to be able to understand it. The more material things that you have don't lead to anybody's happiness. And in fact, in many cases, they don't produce increased happiness at all. They cause more problems with us. So having a materialistic mindset is not only impacting, taking us away from our true purpose of living, was to gain spiritual qualities and to become better human beings. Instead, it changes us to start focusing on what am I wearing, what kind of iPhone do I have, what kind of car do I need, and start thinking too much about that. And even more, it causes us to work 40, 50, 60 hours a week to acquire these material possessions, which we probably don't need half of them anyway. And so somehow we've been brainwashed through advertisements, through discrete and very specific advertisements done in a very scientific way. There's a lot of study, there's a lot of stuff written about this, to create this materialism for the benefit of businesses. And in the long run, what we see it's doing is it's taking away our life from us. It's making Americans work so much that they hardly have free time to take care of their kids. I once had an issue with a child showing up at my house about 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, and just really strange, more or less demanding to come in because his friend used to live in that particular house where I was living. And I said, well, but this is not his house anymore. And the reason why is this kid, his parents just had to leave him alone until they came home later, maybe 6 or 7 at night. So so many different things are being impacted by materialism. I think our time with our families, our focus on the more important things in life, and even from an economic point of view, the overproduction of things that we don't need, which is leading towards increased issues regarding climate change and environmental degradation in the world today. So it is all interconnected. It's hard to say one or the other, but I definitely think materialism. And by the way, if we go back to the 60s and 70s, when I was out being an activist, right, in the street, we were anti-materialistic at that time. That's what we talked about a lot. So and we believed that it was not something that was good for anybody's life. Okay, since that time, that battle was lost, but maybe it's time we can switch it back around and we can talk about living a minimalist type of life where we really understand that many of these things that we think that we need, we really don't need at all.
And interesting because you mentioned the word needs about 20 times. And I think maybe that there's something there, right? What do we actually need? And where does this need for something actually start from? Could you say something about why do we need certain things that we really do not need? What pushes there? And how could we then use that lever to then shift the leader to what is really giving us well-being, happiness, and
okay, I'm just a simple, agricultural specialist. This is getting a little bit beyond but I do read about these things. I would say that as we develop as children in these societies, and in societies I grew up in and you grew up in and everyone else, we are constantly bombarded by advertisements. We are constantly bombarded by, the happiness is, is from this or that. So it creates for all of us a certain mental infrastructure. And there are people who've written about this. I've read books about it. We do have a mental infrastructure that really, I think, does kind of make a need for these sorts of things to be happy. In order to be happy, I need to have this, I need to be able to do that. And I don't think that is actually right. I've lived around the world. I've usually lived in pretty decent places, but now I live on an collective farm in Ukraine, in a house who has, homemade mud brick walls. Okay, I made it look very nice with a nice covering and everything else, but basically I live very simply in a small house. And sometimes people go, because I'm the only American in the whole area, they come to the door and they say, or the gate, and they say, what are you doing here? What's so nice about being here? And I said, isn't it obvious to you? Look how beautiful the nature is. It really is true. Where I live, it's really beautiful. The nature is forest, fields, producing food. But okay, I do think the need comes from our development of ourselves, from childhood up until, later in life. When I was 15 or 16 or 17 years old and all this thing started activating Black, racial issues, women's issues, economic and issues that were very important to my generation, my mind perhaps changed at that point in time. And that's what created in me, the fact that I don't need any of that. I'm perfectly happy to live without it. But there are people, I'm sure, that really feel that they need to work that extra, 20 hours a week to be able to get, something, a vacation or what, I don't know. But, but really in the end of the day, they really don't need all of that.
And what I find interesting is also the triggers that create the need. So with my kids, there were some games they were playing, and I sat down with them and they got really excited about something, about reaching a goal or opening a coffer or whatever it was. And I just sat with them and said, you're aware what's happening here, right? They're creating a dynamic by which you are now wanting to, and they said that, they thought about it. And it's kind of interesting that we should, from when they're kids, really help people to understand the triggers that then cause these needs, that then cause the unnecessary consumerism, which then causes or the disaster. So I think there's something that we can do there. But now let's go to Nabil's question. So you said you're not quite familiar or comfortable there. You're going to be very comfortable here, because by working at the World Bank and analyzing so many opportunities, so many possibilities. Now, Nabil asked, why is it that great inventions to manage climate change do not easily find their way for implementation? What do we actually need to tackle to facilitate the application of innovative approaches? And I'm sure you saw a lot of proposals coming your way. And just how can we help this to move forward? What do you think? How can we allow this necessary innovation to happen?
Nabil, we all know there are books. You probably read them. And so there are books. You don't have to, why this is happening and what we can do about it. There are really good books written about it. You can buy them. I can give you some suggestions. But basically, what I think is that we're being distracted. We're being distracted away from, making the changes that are needed into other areas, like who the next president should be. Okay, that's an important subject. I'm not saying it isn't important, but certainly the climate change issues are very important. And so like there are even the youth, the young people in Europe are saying, you people are killing us. You're doing terrible things. My generation is going to be suffered. When I'm 50 years old, the world will be in a big problem because you are doing nothing and you are subsidizing fossil fuels in a huge way, right? So the world is the structures of the world in terms of climate change, for example, is actually pushing more issues that will create more climate change because of the laws and because of the businesses that are concerned with these things. Okay, there are some countries, I think Sweden and other Scandinavians and Germany and others that are saying, okay, we're going to get rid of coal. We're going to keep fossil fuels in the ground and everything else. But the only way that we're going to be able to do this and make it work is if we actually start doing these things. And really the reason why we're not doing those things is twofold. One, I think people are too calm about this. People are really too laid back and accepting that these things are happening and maybe they understand, maybe they've heard, maybe they studied a little bit, they've gone to an Al Gore, training session. But they basically are not doing enough to move these things in the right direction. There should be no reason in any country in the world today, in my opinion, that any government should approve subsidies for fossil fuels. It is almost a crimes against humanity. And so, how to move things away? Well, part of it is we have to, as a people, begin to really understand what needs to move in order to make things happen. And the other thing is we have to really understand, okay, we can talk, some of the easy things are keep the fossil fuels in the ground. Okay, that's understandable what that means. Let's switch to solar, which I have solar panels behind me here, and switch to wind, get rid of coal, maybe even get rid of nuclear. All of those things are pretty easy. We can understand technically, I think, how to do it. But then what about the other things like the overproduction in the world? For example, I read somewhere that something like 1 billion people alive today have no electric power whatsoever. The inequalities between the rich and the poor, they're everywhere. Do we as a society, are we content to live with that? I personally am not. But do we talk about it? How many people really think that, so many, maybe, what percentage that is, maybe 10 or 15% of the world is really living, beyond, anything that we would like to think is a good possibilities for life in the centuries in which we're living right now. So my personal feeling is education. We need to understand why things are the way they are. And we need to understand why certain things are going in a certain direction, like the subsidies issue, like the laws that are being made to benefit these groups. I mean, many of these groups hardly pay any taxes. How can it be? How, really, honestly, how can it be? I don't understand it. I hope a lot of other people don't understand it. But when we don't understand it, what do we do about it? Do we go out and vote? Do we go talk to our neighbors? Do we talk to our family? Have we talked to our colleagues at work? Have we had the discourses that we need to bring these things up and to talk about? Because if we don't talk about it, sooner or later, It's going to hit us in the back of the head, some kind of a crisis, and then maybe we'll wake up and do something about it, a little bit like we're seeing today with Black Lives Matter. Until we saw this man almost literally murdered in front of our eyes by a policeman, you know, we just, every day these things were happening and we didn't do anything about it. Finally, something woke us up. And God willing, this will go forward and we will be able to see some real changes. I mean, they're talking about police departments being kind of like militarized, groups in the United States today. And they're doing things like taking care of the homeless, taking care of the mentally ill. What is a policeman doing taking care of mentally ill people? So they're saying that the whole structure of the system, of public safety has been shifted in such a way that it's moved into a very bad place. And it seems like many people around the world, I mean, there are many people have been complaining about it, but obviously they're not been complaining about it enough. That's what I think that it's about. They need to just do more.
And the questions are piling up, so that's good news. There's a lot of interest that's been sparked, and there's two connected questions. One is from Facebook. We're also connected on Facebook, and Elin Kambuga talks about housing and how housing in many places takes like half of the paycheck, even if you're not buying a lot of stuff. So there's a big element there of housing that has an impact also on the environment, but it's also the big chunk in why people work a lot. And Jean Parker also mentioned in a society with this economic disparity, many people work so much just to survive. They don't even have a luxury of material gain or anything else. It's just, and the two questions go to the essence of, there's a vast majority of people that just need to survive, never mind everything else. And maybe something on housing and how that can issue that can be bringing home the climate in a different way.
Okay, I mean, these are social issues that are really important. I mean, I don't live in the United States anymore, but I read about the issues on the cost of, and it has reached a point. I saw some statistics somewhere along the lines that in many of the cities around the world, like the question said, 50% of the income is going towards housing, and even sometimes even more, and really when you're in a situation in the United States where healthcare is extremely expensive and housing is extremely expensive, and you get in yourself being squeezed into a little bit, of a little bit of a container, and you just simply have to work and work and work and able to just, survive to the next day. This is all out of balance, and what can be done about housing? Well, okay, I'll go back to the beginning. I was a faculty member at a university in the United States, and I bought, because I've always tried to be a minimalist. I bought a small house and I had an old car. All my friends had big houses and new cars. I said, what? And I actually noticed that those that had big houses and new cars, there was even one guy with a swimming pool. And I watched what he did. He used to be a friend. We used to get together and play basketball or something. And this guy couldn't, after he bought a big house with a swimming pool, the only thing he did was clean his house and clean his swimming pool. He didn't have time for anything else. There's no need for all these big houses. I moved to the Netherlands and I lived there for about 5 years. And in the Netherlands, the houses there, which are really quite nice, are by American standards for someone of my, let's say, economic capability, income. They're tiny to an American, but to a Dutch person, they're wonderful, and their kids love it. And the idea for many people in the Netherlands is it's the best place to raise children, because they have smaller houses. They don't want to have both working full time, both husband and wife full time. There's a huge amount of part-time work in the United States. So like many of the spouses only work 50% of the time. That's a big benefit to the family. If both in the United States, if both spouses are working 100% of the time, where's the time for kids and family and everything else, But when you can say you work full time, the other works 50% of the time, it doesn't matter if it's the mother or the father, it doesn't matter in the Netherlands, that gives you a whole lot of breathing room in the family. And so I think part of the housing issue is we've just gone crazy in a materialistic viewpoint, thinking that was, what we really needed. And did we really need it? I think the answer is probably no. But then we go to look at the cities and the way the cities are being developed. and the way, it has been a social issue where I grew up outside of Washington, D.C. I'll just give another example. There was a farm across the street from me in a place called McLean, Virginia, which was not so far away from Washington, D.C. at the time. When I go back to the house where I lived in 1965, around there, well, even before that, not only is there no farm, you have to drive about an hour before you begin to even see the countryside anymore, because all of these huge complexes of houses, large houses, very expensive houses and cars and everything else have been built and in this materialistic society. And so, we have to think small. I think when we talk about housing, we have to think small. I believe that, quite frankly, and be satisfied with small and green, if you want, surroundings about you.
And there's some interesting cases of like the Somashoka fellows, social entrepreneurs, that have actually run some very interesting projects in Mexico, in Brazil, and in the US, of actually creating cheaper houses, but more sustainable houses, accompanied by microcredit concepts. So it's making things more affordable, making them smaller, making them more sustainable, and then now replicating these models around the world. So there are ways in which this can go forward. And when you were saying about going less and so forth, Emily Hill has a question about minimalism.
Yeah, okay.
What does minimalism mean for the future of the economic system and economic growth?
Yes, let's put it this way. If you look at the facts, and if you want, we can show some things on this. You can do some reading on it. If we look at the facts today, the planet is overproducing. So and a lot of that overproduction is being done in places like North America and Europe versus the other countries of the world like Africa and South Asia, right? So, in order to balance this out so that we have a planet that's going to be survivable from an ecology point of view, from any kind of point of view about equity between rich and poor, then either the richer companies of the world must give up a little bit of their wealth, because just to say, okay, let's make China and let's make all of Africa like America, that will probably double the problems of climate change, double the problems of overproduction in the world, and double the issues related to ecology, food production, and everything else. It's not a solution. Really, in many ways, I've been a development specialist all my life, and I always believed, okay, we're going to come and we're going to help this particular group develop to be able to live a better life, have more capabilities, more opportunities, this, that, and the other. Now I think we should go back to the United States and to try to do a reverse development activity. You don't need all of that. You need to get, it's not right, it's not equitable, And so it is a very difficult question, but if we continue on the current development of material things on a world scale, like we have in the United States, the planet is doomed. These are facts that I'm not making up. You can go read about them. There are scientists that are reading, that are publishing these things today, over and over again. And unfortunately, our news and our politicians are not picking them up. They're too busy dealing with the problems in front of them, and oftentimes problems that are being increasingly controlled by a very small minority at the very top of the pyramid, the 1%.
And there's he says, take a little drink, Gary. This is a tough one, so prepare yourself.
Well, I expect one from so
always has a good one. And then
he can answer it himself.
And then we'll answer the question from YouTube that Shala has asked just after this. So his question is, okay, there's two sides of the coin. There's two actions, there's two activities. One is the need for discourse and people actually understanding the climate problem we have.
Absolutely.
And on the other side of the coin is the application of science to minimize our impacts and bring it in line with the Earth's finite capacity. So on the one side, discourse, understand. On the other side, application of science and minimizing the impact. Do you think we should take step one first and then go and progress to the solution? Or can we progress at the same time?
In my humble opinion, the science, I mean, if we were to compare the two on a balance, weight, the science side is much heavier than the discourse side. In other words, it's way ahead. And so you can't ignore science. We do need science to develop. Like, I mean, this example of the project, microfinance, smaller homes, more ecologically adaptable. I think they should be everywhere. That's great, and we can do that. Our societies are built in such a way that we have the intellectual capacity to do those things. It's not so hard anymore. I mean, compared to what it was when I was growing up, it's just amazing the speed in which things have developed in the last 50 years, and the speed in which they continue to develop even faster and faster. Okay, so on the science side, if you ask me, they're way ahead than the discourse side. The discourse side is where maybe I don't say things in a nice way, but I think too many people are asleep. They've been put to sleep by too much commercialism, too much materialism, too much time at the office, and moving in ways that are not beneficial to them as a family unit, and certainly not beneficial to the society as a whole. And if we go back to talk about, let's say, even how almost all of these issues have an international component, okay, it is so important that not only do we influence our politicians about, the need for international collaboration, and even a kind of an international policing of governments for their promises. Like, governments have promised to do sustainable development goals, and they're supposed to do them by a certain time frame. But if you look at what they're doing in the world, they're not keeping up with the goals that they promised to do. And why is somebody not saying, okay, really, we need to keep up with these goals and keep it going? Some international governance agency needs to get the data. But a lot of countries won't give the data, or they don't collect the data. And so it's a lot of a problem. So I would say discourse is really way behind science. That's my personal opinion. And we really, so because I think science is probably more attuned to the issues and more ready to deal with solving these issues as kind of that's what scientists like to do, versus the discourse side, which really needs to impact on the decisions that are being taken by those that are controlling the laws and the regulations and the societies in which we live. When they continue going in the wrong direction, doesn't matter how good science is, if you ask me, we're still going to end up in a bad place.
Now I'm going to do something very legal and merge 4 questions into one, because we have 2 minutes left. So the umbrella is from Shalasti from YouTube, and she asked, isn't unity in our goals a prerequisite for achieving this change in economic, social conditions, climate change, and so forth? And then Sheila Goodman says, how can we bring economic justice for all? Anonymous attendee says, how can we work together, again, this concept of unity, with our sister nations to address these challenges and these most important issues? And then Jeff Barnes, how can we change the economic mindset and the economist's mindset to a more balanced and moderate style? So is unity what can bring all of this together?
Unity brings it together. I mean, okay, I think everybody probably knows that racism, for example, is a social reality. My understanding from a scientific community, if someone wants to correct me, they can, that we're all one race. It's the human race. The difference of a little bit of melatonin in our skin, or how our face is constructed, is not another race, so to speak. So we have to get over the fact that all people in the world are really not really one entity, one family, if you will. We are really very much the same, and I can say that I've worked in 60 or 70, even maybe more countries around the world. And I can firmly tell you that, from my opinion, human beings are the same everywhere. We want the same things in our families, in our children, in the way we live, to be happy, to be healthy, and actually, even to live a moral and decent life. I don't see any difference between a Japanese, a Chinese, a South Asian, and here in Ukraine or whatever. So unity is a prerequisite. We need to understand that that has to be. If we're going to be fighting one religion against the other, that's ridiculous. I put a quote on the video that we showed from the Pope about the need for climate change, as it's a moral responsibility. The Pope said, well, we as a Baha'i, we should jump on the bandwagon. Absolutely. We work together with all other religions. We are not alone in this game. All the religions come from one God. We need to be unified by people. We need to be unified by religion. We need to be unified in science, which, by the way, there's a lot of unity in science. If you look at the publications that are going around the world today, there's quite a bit of unity. The unity is mostly on the other end of the spectrum, between the extremes of wealth and poverty, and that's where a lot of the problems seem to be taking place. I mean, we can go a lot into that. So unity is a prerequisite. I firmly believe that.
Beautifully said. And I think that's probably the ideal closing remark. And I go back to the first question that Achishida Gutman asked is, why as Baha'is are we so reluctant to stand up and say what we believe in? Maybe it's because we don't know exactly how to position ourselves and what to say. And you've been so clear in actually offering this concept of unity, this concept of moving forward, of finding the bridge with youth, with other generations, working, not just staying there, but really observing, engaging with people. And at the end of the day, I think it's we can do what we can. And I think each one of us should actively look for a way in which it fits them best to actually make this happen. So I think this is a beautiful way to end this hour that we spent together. It went flying, so it must have been good. Thank you very much, Gary. Thank you very much to all of you for your questions. And we look forward to seeing you next week. And I see if I can quickly put the post next one. Next Saturday, we have Beppe Robbiati, member of the National Spiritual Assembly of Italy, of all places, coming to the US and sharing his ideas about what should we do next. So we look forward to next week. Thank you very much, Gary, and all of you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Bye-bye now.
When all around is scorn. In our lives there's a time a-coming when glory could be born. So you're wondering, girl, is trouble here to stay? There's a new world coming your way. In our times there's a storm a-coming, bringing trouble and pain to everyone. In our times there's a strong wind blowing, tearing down the world of song. In our times could be a time a-coming when we'll feel the brilliant sun. So you're wondering, girl, is trouble here to stay? There's a new world coming your way.